Good evening, everyone. My name is John Tiggs, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge, of course, that we are here on Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Nanook, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Red River Métis. In addition, of course, McNally Robinson Booksellers rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. It's lovely to see you all here tonight on such a beautiful day outside. We are here, of course, to celebrate the launch of public service in tough times, working under austerity in Manitoba. Huge thanks to the, oh yes, applaud. Huge thanks to the University of Manitoba Press for publishing this book. And if you have just arrived and are looking for a seat, there are still plenty over here, and there is an aisle right in the middle, so you don't have to worry about pushing past me. Thank you so much. I'm also the least important person who will be speaking, so please do feel free to walk in. And on that note, this book has an incredible list of collaborators and contributors, so we're so pleased to have the editors here tonight, as well as a special guest, so I won't take up too much more of your time. There'll be a number of presentations from this podium, after which we'll move along to a Q&A. If you do have a question during that period, please just put up your hand. I'll approach you with a handheld microphone to ensure your questions are audible. And at the end of the evening, I'll be back with some information about signing procedure. But for now, I have the great pleasure of introducing one of this book's editors to kick off the evening. Jesse Hajer is an associate professor in the Department of Economics and Labor Studies program at the University of Manitoba. He is the co-author of Social Service, Private Gain, The Political Economy of Social Impact Bonds, which was published by the University of Toronto Press. Please join me in welcoming.
Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. If you want to get a lot of people at your book launch, the trick is to get a bunch of people from town to write the chapters of the book for you, and you can fill the house. This book is the centerpiece and final publication of the Austerity in Manitoba project, which was sponsored by the Manitoba Research Alliance, that is examining provincially funded public services in Manitoba from 2016 to 2022. The research presented in the volume analyzes the degree and impact of the austerity policy implemented in Manitoba from 2016 to 2022. The book combines a detailed analysis of published provincial government data on expenditures and staffing with survey data for more than 2,000 public service workers. I'd like to start right off the top by emphasizing the collective nature of this work and how grateful we all are to have had the privilege to partner with so many dedicated individuals and organizations. This project would not have been possible without the chapter authors, our labor and community partners, and their membership who took the time to share their insights, their knowledge, and expertise with us. As the title of the book suggests, these organizations were working through tough times when we approached them to do this work. It was a commitment over and above their day job, and we very much appreciate that effort. So very quickly, I want to thank ATU 1505, ACES, CUPE Manitoba, and a large number of locals, Doctors Manitoba, IBW 2034, MGU, MACA, MAHCP, MTS, Operating Engineers 987, UFCW, Unifor, WANT, and WAPSO, as well as the 3 faculty unions. Those were the labor organizations that partnered with us on this project, and our community partners, SEDNet Manitoba, MANSO, the Manitoba Arts Network, the Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association, and then a Manitoba Association of Women's Shelters all took the time to make this possible. So thank you very much. We're going to start the night off by inviting Kevin Rebeck to come up, President of the Manitoba Federation of Labor, here as a key partner in the project. Kevin, Anna, and the MFL were all instrumental in connecting us with the labor partners in the initial stages of the project. So Kevin, please come up and share a few words with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you all for being here. Manitoba's unions were at the forefront in the fight against austerity with the Pallister PC government. And that included taking the government to court over its wage freeze legislation that stripped away the collective bargaining rights of over 120,000 public sector workers. And while we eventually forced the PC government to repeal the law under Heather Stephenson's brief time as premier, a lot of the damage to our public services had been done because of the cuts and chaos of 7 years of austerity, leading to longer waits and cuts to services in healthcare and other areas, overcrowded classes, and less than one-on-one support for students, crisis-level staffing shortages across the public sector, and weaker public services. This is an important book because it provides first-hand accounts of the impacts that austerity has had on the working people who we all count on to deliver the public services that we all need. Unions are all too familiar with the results of austerity, including workers who are burnt out and exhausted from being forced to do even more and try to fill the holes in the public sector while meeting the demands of Manitobans and the rising mental health injuries that they suffer at work. Workers facing more violence in the workplace than ever before, due in no small part to the erosion of the social safety net and the connected levels of mental health, addictions, and poverty struggles that we witness every day in Winnipeg and all across Manitoba, and trying to clean up the collective bargaining mess left by the PC government due to both Pallister's wage freeze laws and the fact that government largely refused to bargain for years, either directly or by directing public sector employers like universities, health authorities, Manitoba Hydro, and many others. So I want to thank Jesse, Ian, and Jennifer for the important work in documenting the realities of austerity and in highlighting the importance of public services to all Manitobans. It's important not to take these public services for granted because, as we've all lived through, governments can cause a serious amount of damage to these services in a relatively short amount of time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kevin, for providing that important context and recap of what public service workers were facing over this period. One thing that came through very clearly early in our research was how this period of austerity in Manitoba on the surface seemed to fail even on its own terms. Austerity-focused politicians say they just want to find savings. They want to make things more efficient through leaner government and balance the budget. They say this is going to increase business confidence, that it's going to make the economy grow. These proponents of austerity present it as a common sense approach that is good for everyone in the long run. The problem is, this is not how austerity plays out in practice. After decades of neoliberalism, governments are already operating on a shoestring complement. As we detail in the book, the deep staffing and program cuts seen in our period of study push programs and systems into crisis. Working conditions, job satisfaction, employee mental health, recruitment and retention, worker safety, these all worsened. That was 5 different questions on the survey, 85% or higher on all those questions. Workers were devalued and overwhelmed. The quality of public services suffered. Examples of this, detailed in the chapters of our volume that cover many different areas of government, are plentiful. Crown attorneys with hundreds of files without being able to properly prosecute them. Manitoba residents having to wait up to 6 months for a health card. Professionals in the care sectors giving everything they have, but still seeing the needs in the hospitals and schools and childcare centers go unmet. Transportation and infrastructure staff unable to keep in check profit maximizing corporate contractors who are jeopardizing public safety. This all hurts government efficiency. It hurts taxpayer value for money and our broader economic competitiveness. One thing we aim to do in this book was to frame our case study of Manitoba in an understanding of what austerity is, why it's pursued, despite the terrible track record. What we see in Manitoba was not a surprise for those who've looked at austerity in other places. When we scratch beneath the surface and dig into what proponents of austerity actually seek, trace out the logic of their arguments, it's not about efficiency, it's not about economic growth, it's about redistribution. It's about redistributing resources from workers and the public sector to corporations and their shareholders. When we look at the typical austerity package, it's about cutting benefits and programs for workers and the marginalized, not for corporations and the wealthy. Expensive contracting out to corporations, that's not a problem with austerity governments because it's padding the pockets of investors. changing laws to make it harder for workers to organize, protecting and stopping workers from protecting themselves at work are almost always part of austerity packages. What does that really have to do with balancing the budget? Now I'd like to invite my fellow editors to speak. Jennifer Keith will come up first and speak to the process that led up to the book. And Ian Hudson will give a case study on healthcare as a sample chapter in the book.
Wow, there is a lot of you here tonight. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to my incredible friends and my family who came to support me, and book club who came to support me. Thank you so much. And to the rest of you, whether I know you or we're meeting for the first time tonight, it means a lot that you're here to help us celebrate the launch of public service in tough times. As I was getting ready for tonight, I found myself reflecting on everything that brought us to this moment. This book truly represents years of research, passion, and collaboration. Before I talk about my experiences, I want to thank Jesse for his insightful explanations of the theories around austerity. He's been trying to teach me these for years now. I have to admit, when I first started this work, my understanding was pretty abstract and rudimentary. But through our collaborations, I learned that austerity is not just a set of policies. It shows up in the daily realities of workers, public services, and ultimately the lives of Manitobans. Austerity came to life for me through the voices of workers, people with deep experience, technical knowledge, and a clear sense of what was happening on the ground. Their openness was made possible. Their openness made this work possible, and it was our partnerships with the unions that helped us to build the trust needed to understand what they were navigating. It all began back in 2017 when Jesse reached out and suggested we collaborate on a project about a plan to privatize government air services. This was my first opportunity to work with the MGU, and specifically Andy Rager from the MGEU as well. It was also my first real encounter with the concept of austerity. Together, Jesse and I spent countless hours listening to doctors, nurses, pilots, and other public sector employees. They shared experiences that formed a cautionary tale about what austerity can look like in practice. They told us that privatizing essential services like air ambulance and fire suppression could compromise care and put Manitobans' lives at risk. And they warned that instead of saving money, funds would shift into the pockets of private corporations, organizations that are far more focused on profits than they are on people. It was becoming not just a theory for me now, it was a sobering glimpse into a very troubling future. So a few years later, Jesse approached me again, this time to investigate how austerity was being implemented with Manitoba Infrastructure and the Vehicle and Equipment Management Agency. What we found was a shift from a cautionary tale to something that sounded like a poorly scripted, dramatic nonfiction tragedy, and not the kind that book club likes to read. The government at the time was in the middle of a multi-year push to shrink the public service without consultation or justification. Workers described deliberate strategies to starve departments of financial and human resources, pushing more services towards contracting and privatization. And the result? Declining service quality, little evidence of cost savings, and a serious erosion of internal government capacity. At this point, austerity was no longer abstract to me. Through the rich testimony shared by the workers, it was now a tangible thing, and I could see how it was putting Manitobans' safety and well-being at risk. Like me, Jesse was moved by the commitment of the public servants we spoke with, so he reached out again, inviting me to help him build what would become public service in tough times. This project allowed us to broaden the lens and examine how austerity affects workers and public services more widely. With the gracious support of both Ian and Jesse, I was grateful and excited to come on as co-editor. I was also thrilled to revisit our earlier research with Holly, our incredible research assistant. Where is she? Oh, Holly. Holly, I think we need to find a title that truly captures everything that you contributed though, but thank you. The new data showed that in the 18 months since our first study, the government's push for privatization continued. Workers reported rising workloads, increased stress, growing public safety concerns, and declining service quality. Despite their very public calls that something needs to change, their pleas went unheard and conditions only worsened. I was also incredibly honored to collaborate with my dear friend Negon Sinclair, who's not here tonight, but together we examined the government's austerity agenda as it related to reconciliation. What we found was troubling. It truly did not make sense. Employees were overwhelmed with expanding responsibilities and shrinking resources, while policies undermined community-based action and relationships. It was disheartening because this is the opposite of reconciliation, and it felt like a continuation of the chronic underfunding that has long affected Indigenous communities and initiatives. But despite everything, despite the difficult stories and the challenging realities, tonight is a celebration, not just of a book, but of a collective narrative. A vibrant tapestry woven from the voices of people who show up every day to provide essential services in the face of enormous obstacles. The book stands as a testament to resilience, dedication, and the critical importance of protecting public services for the health of our communities and all Manitobans. So thank you again for joining us on this journey. I hope the stories in these pages inspire all of us to champion a future where public services and public servants are truly valued and protected. Before I pass along the mic though, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to both Ian and Jesse. I'm the baby in the room. They are the experts and I'm the, I don't know, they just bring me along for fun, I think. Jesse, your unwavering commitment over the years is inspiring, and I'm grateful that you kept inviting me back. I'm not sure why, but I'm grateful that you did, and for giving me the opportunity. Yes, well, that's it. I'm the labor. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to learn from you and the workers that we spoke to. Everyone who reads this book is benefiting from Jesse's dedication. And Ian, I'm going to turn things over to you in a moment, but first, I want to thank you for your patience and guidance. Ian is so far more accomplished than I am as an academic and an author, which makes his patience with what was probably hundreds of emails full of questions and requests for reassurance even more impressive. He answered every one of those emails with calm professionalism, and I imagine deep internal sighs. Ian, I'm truly grateful for your support. So please help me welcome my very own Master Yoda, Ian.
Thanks, Jennifer. After hearing that speech, people are really going to wonder who the junior partner here is. That was really fantastic. Before I get started on my own little case study chapter, we've got a few thank yous to get through. The first one is for the people at University of Manitoba Press. This was a long process and you were absolutely wonderful to work with every step of the way. It was a pleasure from sort of beginning to end to work with the publishing company. So thank you very, very much for all your support. The second, and Jennifer has already mentioned this, is to Holly Scotland, who's given a wave already, but we actually probably can't express how important she was to the completion of this project. From the very, very beginning, she organized the chapter authors. She put them through the ethics process of the University of Manitoba, which is very time consuming. She proofread chapters. She provided feedback. She even put together the index. She was a one-person superstar on this book. So thank you very, very much for all this help. The other person who did a lot of invaluable work at the very, very early stages of this book was Jack McCauley, who is also about to wave to everybody. Nicely done. Who did a ton of work on the staffing and department budget numbers that you're going to get a little taste of in my talk. So thank you very much to both of you. So Jesse's done a really good job of explaining kind of the broad picture of austerity, and Jennifer's done a wonderful job of talking about the history of the project itself. And so my job is to provide one kind of particular example of the chapters that are the same template for the chapters throughout the book. So throughout the book, every single chapter has kind of two things. One is what economists get all excited about in the raw data. So this is like the department budget numbers, the staffing numbers, things you can really prove. And Jack put a lot of that together. So that forms the sort of broad context for each of the chapters. And the second part of the chapters, the part that Jesse talked about, is the stories of the workers in the public sector themselves. And so we let them express the conditions of their work in their own words. And what each chapter tries to do is use those own words to provide an opportunity to expose the voice of those workers. And we've got a whole host of chapters that follow that template I think in every single program area in the provincial government. And a bunch of authors here have done an absolutely wonderful job of detailing an amazing but harrowing experience that the public sector went through during that 6 years. So we've got chapters on the environment, on child and family, on crown corporations, on adult education, on education. And every one of them follows this kind of same script, but every one of them in their own unique way talks about the real grinding circumstance under which people had to work in the public sector during that period. So my particular chapter is on health. And when I say my particular chapter, that's not quite right, because I have co-authors, Robert Chernomas and Catherine Burley, who can't be here tonight. So big thank you to those as well. So let's start out with the numbers in health. And they make for sort of, harrowing exposition. So to start off with, in between 2015, the last year that the NDP was in power, and 2019, the last pre-COVID year for the Conservatives, real spending per person in Manitoba for healthcare fell by 4%. What that meant was that during the NDP's reign, Manitoba ranked within the top 4 provinces in healthcare spending per person in every single year. For those years before 2019, when the Conservatives were in power, the province was one of the bottom 2 in health spending per person. Even during COVID, when those absolute cuts were reduced and the government was forced to spend money on the healthcare system to try and do something about the pandemic, as opposed to other provinces, what the Manitoban Conservative government did was they spent more on COVID, but way less on the rest of the healthcare system. And so that when we emerged from the COVID issue, the healthcare system was in far worse shape. And so those cuts took very, very tangible forms in different places. As soon as they got elected, the Conservatives canceled $1 billion worth of health infrastructure projects that were promised by the NDP. They cut all of the regional health authorities' budgets. They closed emergency care facilities in Winnipeg. They closed the urgent care facility at the Misericordia. Things were on such a shoestring that when the COVID pandemic actually hit, emergency rooms in northern and rural Manitoba were closed, and the financial constraints were so binding that they remained closed well into the summer of 2022. One of the ways that or maybe the chief way that the health authority managed to achieve the budget cuts that the province set out for it was to simply not hire people for vacant positions. And so this was what is called vacancy rates, positions that are supposed to be filled but have no one in them. And in the Grace Hospital in 2022, the vacancy rate was 28% for nurses. In the Interlake and Eastern Health region, the vacancy rate for nurses was 36%. So this creates just almost unworkable conditions for the people that remain in the positions in those areas. The Conservatives also, as Jesse talked about, privatized a considerable amount of the healthcare delivery. So they privatized the Life Flight Air Ambulance program. They extended the use of private stretcher services into rural Manitoba. And in 2022, they spent they increased their spending on private agency nurses by 47%. So it is, I guess, conceivably possible that those kind of grim numbers can result in better health outcomes, potentially, if there are wonderful efficiencies to be found. And that was kind of the Conservatives' promise going into this. And this is often the promise of these kind of austerity programs. But evidence doesn't bear that out either. So under the Conservatives, wait times increased in Manitoba, and they didn't just increase in Manitoba, but they increased in Manitoba relative to the other Canadian provinces. So just to take one quick example, by 2019, the gap for cataract surgery between Manitoba and the average of other Canadian provinces was 65 days. Physician to population ratio is another sort of common measure of sort of how healthy your healthcare system is. And again, Manitoba is always kind of a little behind the Canadian average when it comes to measures like this, but under the Conservatives, it got far worse. So in 2015, Manitoba had 204 physicians per 100,000 population, which was 20 fewer than the Canadian average. But by 2020, that gap had widened to 25. And so in a situation like that, you don't expect healthcare workers to have maybe the sort of greatest work lives. But what the surveys showed was it was a group of people that were under tremendous stress, felt undervalued, and increasingly pressured. Over and over again, we heard heartbreaking stories of healthcare workers who were frustrated by their increasing inability to do the jobs that they had really dedicated their lives to. So these were incredibly passionate people. No one goes into healthcare just because they feel like doing something, right? Like these are people that want to help, they want to do their jobs, and they were increasingly being unable to do it. So some of the survey results were that between 85 and 90% of people or in the healthcare sector found that their work conditions, their job satisfaction, and their mental health had all deteriorated. One long-term healthcare worker said in a very sort of succinct way, before 2018, this was a great place to work. It's now become a toxic mess. Numerous respondents talked about staff morale deteriorating, increased stress, exhaustion, and burnout, feelings of being undervalued in their workplace. One allied healthcare worker noted that employees are incredibly stressed and undervalued. Everyone is stretched so thin that there's a very high rate of sick time that people are taking. Many people that would have been delighted to work longer a few years ago are now considering retirement. It's not surprising then that more than 70% of the respondents said that they were asked to provide the same or more care, but with fewer resources. And they argued that that had led to a dramatic reduction in service quality. Another worker said that the lack of funding for our clinic and staff has meant that patients who used to get care through our clinic can no longer find care in the public sector. So the big conclusion of the chapter is that although the word crisis has been increasingly applied to healthcare in Canada, between 2016 and 2022, Manitoba fared worse than the national average by almost every single measure. The survey results suggest that workers in the healthcare industry were finding their jobs increasingly stressful, unrewarding, and patient care increasingly compromised. These were not inherent, inevitable problems with the public healthcare system. They're very much the result of deliberate political decisions. Thank you.
Jennifer, Ian, it was an absolute pleasure to work with you on this book. I feel like I brought you in on somewhat false pretenses. Jennifer, it's just another project. 20 times more than the last one. Ian, do you want to just be a kind of co-editor on this little book I have an idea on? Ian ended up taking over the entire back end of the process of getting the book out the door, working with the publishers. So very, very gracious, and thank you, grateful, and thank you to both of you for doing that. I'm going to close tonight. First, I'm going to just read an excerpt from the conclusion to our introductory chapter. And then I'm going to embarrass all the chapter authors who are here today. Okay. So Ian, Catherine, and I wrote in the end of the introduction, over the last 40 years in Canada and in the global north more broadly, austerity has gone together with neoliberal policy reforms, including increasing the private sector provision of public services, downsizing the public service, and deregulating labor markets. The consequences have clearly been greater inequality, a weakened labor movement, and increased precarity for working people. As exemplified in the chapters of this volume, these impacts are also clear in the Manitoba case. Compromised public services, increased inequities across these services, and reduced capacity of the provincial government to promote Manitoba's collective social and economic interests. For public sector workers, austerity has created a vicious cycle of understaffing, burnout, and attrition, leading to despair. The question then is, why has such action been voluntarily self-imposed by the government of Manitoba when the consequences appear so dire? In addition to summarizing the impact of austerity, we have attempted to answer this question by highlighting not only the losers who make up the vast majority of the population, but also the elite small group of winners and how austerity has been pursued in their interests. Austerity and its consequences are increasingly pressing issues in our time, undermining our capacity to address existential threats such as global heating and biodiversity loss. Austerity has also been linked to the rise of extremist right-wing ethno-nationalism, generating political instability and increasing organized hate and violence. The potential for these movements to seize governments, a threat many of us thought was long confined to the history of advanced capitalist countries, is resurgent. We hope that this volume will help advance research on austerity through our case study of Manitoba, shining a light on how austerity operates and its consequences, and hopefully adding to the province's institutional memory, sustaining resistance to this zombie ideology that will inevitably be resurrected as recollections fade over time. So we're going to move into the question and answer period. So before we do that, I would like all our chapter authors to stand up because we're going to be directing as many questions as we can towards you. So please stand up, everybody. Mark Hudson, Willow Curran, Colin Scott, Jim Silva, Lynn Fernandez, Sean McKinnon, Fletcher Barber, Brenda Austin Smith, Elizabeth Coman, Julie Gard, Robert Trinomis, Sarah Zell. Did I miss anyone? Jim, I think I got you, right? Yeah. Okay. Again, thank you all for coming. We're going to open it up for question and answer now.
Thank you. I commend you all on this noble and ambitious project, but I have a question for you. How did you hit on giving false credibility to the conservative concept, which is effectively a psyops of calling this austerity, when in fact, like our neighbors to the south, it's a purposeful strategy to privatization and profiteering? How did you, as I say, I'm so concerned about the use of austerity. That's the conservative term.
I'll take a few questions. Oh, would you like me to accumulate? Yeah, I need to.
And so it looks like we'll be accumulating questions, so we'll take that. And then we'll take two more questions now, if anybody has them, and then they'll be answered all.
I can't resist. So I'm asking this from an occupational health perspective. Yes, Cassie. My friends in the UK talk about red tape or bloody bandages as one of the consequences of austerity or the kinds of cutbacks that the government does. One of the things I'm curious about is what we talked a lot about the effect that the actions had on the staff of the public service. But if they're not doing well, what happened to the rest of the people that they were supposed to be protecting, for example, in terms of occupational health and safety? And what are the consequences now in terms of what's happening to turn that around?
And question number 3. There is one at the moment. Oh, yes.
Thank you very much. That was a very impressive talk, and I applaud you all. I just had a question. I understand the importance of emphasizing Manitoba as a case study, but we were not alone in these savage cuts. As you've mentioned, they were present across Canada and across the world, and they go back many decades. I mean, I remember as a young man, the greed is good decade of the 1980s. And I was just wondering if you might comment on what you think were common factors across the world that drove us there.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll try to tackle the first question. Julie Gard, if you're here, we might try to kick the second question to you. So you give me a yay or a nay once I'm done, and then Ian will try to tackle the third question. So why did we choose the term austerity? And I think austerity is a term, I would suggest it's a term used as much on the left as on the right. And I think what was really interesting when we looked at the literature on austerity, especially the economists who really went out there and tried to justify austerity as like a good thing to do. When you dig into their work, you can really see their true intentions buried deep in the books that they write, right? Like in the introductory chapter, it's all about balancing the budget. It's all about these benefits that are going to be shared by society more broadly. It was a route to prosperity for all. But when you actually read into the deep chapters of these books, what you find is the mechanisms at play are the same mechanisms that we see in the critical political economists who are studying austerity. You can see the mechanisms at play, and the outcomes are clearly acknowledged by the right-wing proponents of austerity. It's like, oh yes, the way this works is clearly through higher unemployment and pushing down the wages of workers. But that's not on the back cover of the book, right? That you have to dig into that analysis. So most of the book is not looking at this type of theoretical literature, but I thought it was important to point out that the challenge that we face under austerity aren't an accident. The outcomes that we see across the various sectors of government in Manitoba, these are the outcomes that were intended to happen. Because like I said earlier, austerity isn't about economic efficiency. It's not about saving money. It's about redistribution. It's about redistribution from workers in the public service to private corporations and those who own them. Julie, do you want to try to answer the occupational health and safety question? Okay, she'll need a microphone. Yeah.
Does you want to come up?
Or you can come up, yeah. Yeah.
All right, so the question, Dorothy, was about what was the effect of health and safety on the workers of these cuts? Is that more or less correct? Yes, okay. So a lot of the data for my chapter was based on workers' compensation board. So that was a pretty good, entry into what happened to people during that. So government workers themselves, but also the public. So people who worked at workers' comp were extremely graphic in their descriptions of their work experience under austerity. I'm trying to remember some of the very pithy things that they said. A lot of them were saying, well, I would like to leave this job, but I can't for various reasons. I'm 3 years from retirement, I need to work, they also said things like, I have expertise that I have learned over decades working here. And if, when I'm replaced by, a temporary worker, they don't have that. So it's not gonna work for people. People were talking about like the attrition in their departments leading to incredibly heavy workloads that they found that they were no longer able to deliver the kind of services they wanted to Manitobans who were injured. And these are people who, I guess we might not always think the workers' comp is the most, beneficent and generous organization, but in fact, the workers who reported did display exactly those characteristics. So, whatever is going on at workers' comp, because a lot of people are denied, their compensation benefits, even though they've been injured and probably at work, but that's a whole other thing, because more of that happened under austerity, right? So there was a whole process of people who did not get the benefits to which they should have been entitled, because of the regime that was trying to get like more returns back to employers, right? Just gonna take more of those premiums and return them back to employers. But yes, people were not only the clients of workers' compensation, but certainly the workers themselves were experiencing excruciating burnout and low morale and disappointment and just general feeling that they were unvalued and that nobody really cared about them.
Okay, and this is the question about sort of Manitoba is hardly unique here, that lots and lots of provinces and nations have gone kind of the austerity route, and so what's in common about that? And part of the answer, I think, to that question is what Jesse was talking about, and what the first question was about, which is about the distributional outcomes of austerity. Right, this isn't something where that's neutral or designed for sort of efficiency purposes, right? It really is, and in the first chapter, we're actually pretty explicit about this. It's really about redistributing resources. It's about shrinking public services, and shrinking public services really harms the people that use those public services the most, right? People who need good quality education, who need open swimming pools, who need parks, right? Because these things are actually sort of not non-commodified things, right? They're things that are free. And poorer people need access to those things more than rich people that can substitute easily because they got lots of income. And so it's removing those very, very strong public sector opportunity or public services that then impact the poorer elements of the population and maybe don't have quite as much political power, and redistributing that towards people with more income and towards profitable opportunities, right? And that logic is what makes it so appealing across so many different areas, right? And you see that logic time and time again. So the strength of it varies depending on your region, right? Because people can fight back. And so where austerity has been resisted is where people in labor unions and social movements fight back against it, and then austerity bites less hard. But where people don't oppose it, it tends to be the default position, precisely because the rich and the powerful benefit so much from it.
Yeah, I would just also add that in the book, in the introduction, we do some of that comparative analysis of trying to place, like, where is Manitoba austerity compared to Greece, for example, right? And we do acknowledge that the austerity we saw in Manitoba was not the type of countrywide intensive austerity that's imposed when you're facing external creditors who are really forcing deep cuts in dollar value terms on your economy and forcing you to really completely change your system of your whole social safety net. So we do talk about the nuance about, there are different types of austerity. In the conclusion, we also go into austerity by department and how things were different during the pandemic in some departments than others. So maybe I can intrigue you to buy the book and or to stick around for a coffee later and we can chat more about that.
Would you like me to accumulate multiple questions again? So we will accumulate some more questions. If anybody out there has one right now.
Thanks for this great book and presentation. I'm wondering if you have any general lessons from all this work about current, anti-austerity organizing in this moment, and especially, I know this wasn't the focus of your analysis, but the current government's continued commitment to tax cuts and balanced budgets.
Question number 2, yes.
I think she kind of had my question there. I was just going to say, I agree with the very first question that, austerity, conservative, I'm guessing we all agree, bad. But there's NDP austerity too. And, we saw that under Greg Selinger, and I think some of that was inescapable. It was a situation nationwide, and I'd like to think it was a kinder form of austerity, but it was uncomfortable. And it wasn't who I think a lot of NDP people felt was who we were. And we're seeing now like a doubling down on balancing the budget, keeping some of the tax cuts. So kind of just curious on your take in your comparative analysis, and we kind of looked at, Mark Carney austerity, NDP austerity, like that kind of stuff. And if there's any maybe hopeful messages in that analysis. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that great overview. Certainly piqued interest to buy the book, but maybe I do tend to for sake of argument, like to take a bit of a devil's advocate approach, and so it's good I'm standing near the back just in case. We, like you hinted, austerity keeps coming back. There seems to be this appetite for it. And what I find very ironic, if you dare to speak about south of the border, is that you have large segments of society, including labor, that seem to support austerity down there. Now, do you get in the book, do you get into some of this motivation? Is it the perception, oh, taxes are going up and we're getting less value, and so we want to do things privately or whatever? I'm just curious if you examine those underlying motivations and philosophy. How is austerity sold, and how are politicians able to recruit people that seem to be hurt the most by it to support it?
Okay, thanks for the questions. Always happy to talk more about the current NDP government and, you know, help to try to nudge them to do better. To be fair to the NDP government, they went into an election, put out a conservative fiscal policy, which, you know, I'm obviously not supportive of, but they actually did it under false pretexts, right? We know, we talk about this a bit in the epilogue of the book. The fiscal forecast, which they did their election campaign on, was basically fixed, right? Like it put forward a highly rosy, optimistic situation. And that clearly wasn't true when the first fiscal update came out and the numbers were updated to be realistic. And what was seen, which was something that myself and many people in this room were highlighting, that the tax cuts that were implemented in the 2023 budget were astronomically huge and completely unsustainable, right? And this was already after over $1 billion in tax cuts going back to 2016, right? So there was clearly a crisis unfolding at the time, but there was an even bigger crisis that was coming because of the tax cuts that were going to cut the legs out from under the public purse. Now, what's, you know, in partnership with the MFL and CUPE and MGU, we highlighted that when the NDP put out that platform, it was under false pretenses, and the NDP got elected maybe based on those commitments, but I would argue what they actually got elected on was an anti-austerity sentiment in Manitoba. People were fed up with the crisis in healthcare. They were fed up with their kids in school not getting their needs met. You can name any service offered by the Manitoba government or funded by the Manitoba government, and people were feeling like it just was not working for them. And I think that's what tossed the PCs out of office, along with the other, you know, highly unsavory issues. We could go on and on. There's been this dogged commitment to balancing the budget in the next 2 years. I don't know how that's possible. The Premier has acknowledged that there is a structural fiscal deficit, right? Which means, like, even on average, this isn't a good economy, bad economy thing. Overall, we don't have enough revenues to meet our expenditures. So the only way then to balance the budget in that context is to cut services even further, right? That's the only thing that can give if you're going to balance the budget and not raise taxes. So this is a situation which, on the rhetorical level, is untenable. You look at what's actually happening, though, in the public accounts, and the government is spending large amounts of money, right? The spending is there, the collective agreements have been negotiated, the wage freeze is gone. We've seen improvements in public sector wages. We've seen hiring creep back up. Are we back to where we were? Not even close, but it's at least moving in the right direction. So I don't know how you square that circle. Anecdotally, we're hearing that departments are being again told to batten down the hatches and rein in expenditures, right? And to me, that's really disappointing for a number of reasons. And I was touching on this in the conclusion. I'm really concerned that the NDP government in 2023 was elected on a message of change and hope, an anti-austerity message. And I see some parallels to what happened in the United States with Barack Obama, right? You see expectations get raised so high and people think there's a fundamental change, but then there isn't. And what happens when you're in that situation when you thought you won, but then you didn't, it doesn't actually materialize in your daily life and your conditions continue to get worse. And I truly believe, that's how we get presidents like Donald Trump, and it creates a very scary horizon going forward. So I hope there's still time. We can still ditch the balanced budget commitment. We have all the reasons in the world. We have the attack on Canada's economy from down south. So we'll see where it goes. I just don't see how they're actually going to do it. How they're going to balance the budget.
Sure, I'll try and deal with the devil's advocate question, which is actually not particularly devil's advocate. It's actually a super good question. At least in the US context, Robert Chernomus and I have done a bit of research on this and sort of how the US went over sort of recent history. And I've sort of got an answer for you, although I'll say it's just my answer and certainly not Robert Chernomus's answer. But before I do, and I'll address mostly kind of in my answer US specific sort of situation, but I don't think there's any reason that Canadians should feel particularly smug about their current situation. We were a couple of big mouth comments and one prime ministerial resignation away from a conservative government, which would have looked a lot like Trump's government. Like it would have been, fossil fuel industry, low tax, all those things, right? So let's not pretend that we're somehow this different place that would never end up like the United States. We are not so far away ourselves. I would say this about the sort of Polyev kind of Trump approach and why it might appeal to some workers. Their approach, I think, is to use the language that they think workers want to hear, right? They're tough talking, right? They roll up their sleeves, blah, 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 right? I think that's part of it. But I think the actual sort of material aspect of it that appeals to people is that they actually acknowledge the deteriorating experience of working class people. Is they tell them, they acknowledge that their working class income is not what it used to be. In the 1960s, one income was enough to feed a family and provide a house and a couple of cars, and you could have a holiday. You try and do that on one income right now with a high school education, and good luck to you. And so they tell people that they hear their frustrations about their limited opportunities, about their affordability crisis, about the fact that they can't pay the rent anymore. That is the message that the Trumps and the Polyevs have, and they're right about it. And no one else is telling people that. No one else is acknowledging that problem. And so Trump and Polyev, they're half right. The problem is they're all wrong at the very same time. Because every single solution that they have to alleviate the stress of the working class is actually going to exacerbate. But when they come and they say, you've got an affordability problem, you can't pay the rent, we'll get the tax man out of your pocket. That's an appealing message. And the way they say that your job has been compromised because some stupid environmentalist doesn't want to cut down the trees or wants to put environmental regulations on your mind, that is appealing as well. And now they're wrong. They cut taxes so you can't have a public education system. That's not a great long-term solution to anything. But as an intuitive message, they are the people that are actually acknowledging the lived experience of workers. And none of the other parties do that very well at all. And so that would be my answer to this kind of the question you posed.
Oh, sorry, guys. So we are actually at the top, we're just approaching the top of the hour, so that has been a fantastic conversation and series of questions from all of you folks. I wasn't sure if anybody on the panel had any closing comments they might like to offer before we get to signing. All right, perfect. So again, huge thanks to all of you for editing this volume and for to all the contributors for being here as well, including Julie, who's roped into answering the question. Thank you very much. Huge thanks to Kevin for coming on board to speak this evening as well, and of course the University of Manitoba Press for publishing this volume. We will now move along to the signing point of the evening. So there will be one moment of beautiful chaos while some people get in line just down this aisle here. Please do feel free to have a copy of the book signed before you pay for it. Just please do visit my colleagues at the cash desk before you leave. We are socialists at heart, but capitalists in practice, and very much appreciate your assistance. So huge thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight. Have a wonderful evening.